Okay, good morning. Okay, the Commissioners, Brazos County Commissioner will meet in the workshop session September 5th, 9:30, Brazos County Administration Building, 200 South Texas Avenue, Suite 106. First item is called to order, and the second is presentation and discussion of the first draft of the Brazos County Subdivision Regulations Diagnostic Report by Freeze Nichols. Not sure who's going to take the lead. Okay, all right.
Thank you, Judge.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're gonna have to present. I should have said something before, but you don't have to present from the podium,
That's perfect.
just so we can catch you on the monitor.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Judge and Commissioners Court, for having us here today. What we are doing today on this workshop is we're going to look at the diagnostic report of your subdivision regulation. So basically what this is just a to-do list of, after talking with you, county staff, the different Bryan College Station city staffs, developers, talking to people who develop land and who regulate that through the regulations, what they think the issues are. And then, of course, when we take a look at going through your subdivision regulations, seeing what was missing, trying to figure out what parts aren't working together or what is missing. So what this document that we have in front of you today is really just that list. Now, we'll go ahead and what today is walking you through that list and seeing if you have any questions. Because what we'll do in October, we're going to come back, we're going to listen to your comments that you have today. We can make any changes to this document, and then we'll come back in October to sort of solidify the document to say, like, yes, we sort of all agree moving forward and updating the county subdivision regulations. This is the game plan that we want to go with. So just quick rounds of introductions. My name's Daniel Harrison. I work for a company called Freeze and Nichols. I've been a planner there for 22 years now, and so what my group does, we work with counties and cities working on development regulations, so subdivision regulations, and the city side, zoning regulations, planning documents, so county strategic plan or a city's comprehensive plan. We work on those type of documents. And I'll start on the far left over there. Stan Lynch, he is heads up our sort of our county coordination along with Liz Grindstaff right there. And then we have Connor Roberts, one of the planners in the office with me, and also David Jones, the other planner, and we were the three who were doing the interviews last month with the stakeholders. Ooh. Thank you. All right, perfect. All right. Make sure that doesn't fall off. Okay, so today's agenda, what we'd like to do is just walk you through an overview of the project. What we have is the 15 priority findings that we think the Commissioners Court is going to be most interested in. So these are the overarching changes that we see coming to the subdivision regulations. That third section, we're going to walk you briefly through the individual sections of your current subdivision regulations and tell you what we thought about what was in there and what updates could potentially be made. And then what we'll do is we'll do a wrap-up. So we'll sort of talk about next steps and where do we go from here. So project overview and process. So what we did back in June, we really started the project working with county staff. In July, we had our stakeholder interviews, and I've sort of touched on those, where we met with county staff, different stakeholders from the different cities, developers, to go through what the issues were. So after hearing all that input, we developed the first draft of the diagnostic report, which is what we're looking at today. And so having this meeting here, to sort of, it's the first meeting to take a look at it, see what you think about the document, talk about it. Do you think this is addressing the issues that you're hearing? What we'll do today is we're taking diligent notes, and then we'll revise the document, work with county staff to make sure we're incorporating whatever changes we talk about today. And then we'll come back once again in October and talk with you one more time before we finalize the document. At that October meeting, we should have a pretty good grasp on everything, and so we can still make changes to the document at that time, and then we'd send you the final document at the beginning of November. So we'll be wrapped up with the project at around November 7th is what the target date is. So real quickly on the stakeholder interviews, just a list of the people that we talked to. Sort of already mentioned those with staff. The different staffs from the had good representation from both cities to come and talk to us, Commissioners Court and people in the development engineering community. So this is just a table of contents of the document structure. The way it's outlined, there's a little introduction just to say what this document's for. We looked at the adopted plans and procedures, and then as I mentioned, the priority findings. That's what I think the Commissioners Court is most interested in, because these are the overarching things, and then the individual sections when we dive down a little bit more into the to the details. So let's sort of just take a look at the priority 15, the findings that we have here, and I can. Feel free to go ahead. This is going to be a workshop, so stop me if you think of any questions while we're talking. We'll go through this section, and of course we can circle back to anything, because when we get to item 15, that may spark something that you heard a little bit earlier. So feel free to stop us, and I'll also have Connor and David chime in as well as we went through the document, put this together. So sort of how we've laid out these slides, I know that's probably a little hard for you to read on the left side, but we'll also have a hard copy for you. Just some of the individual stakeholder feedback that we had is always going to be in that left bar, but really our first priority action item is to comprehensively update the subdivision regulations. So we do see a need to, it's been since 2016 when the last update was made. Hearing from the staff, development community, seeing what the issues are, we do think an update to the subdivision regulations is needed. The organization of the topics and covering multiple sections, we want to try to avoid some duplication. There's some streamlining we can do I think we can really help improve the document for the development community, also what would also result in better development overall. Incorporating flow charts, tables, diagrams, that's going to be very useful for the court, but also useful for staff and the public as they go through the document. Number 2, our next action is to revise the interlocal agreements with the cities of College Station and Bryan. Just as a quick reminder, what the interlocal agreements are in the ETJ areas of both those cities, the state law requires us to have an interlocal agreement between the county and each one of those cities to say who is going to approve plats in the ETJ, because it can be the city, it can be the county, we can divide it up into different areas, but also, and that's the first part, so who approves. The second part is what standards are reviewing out in the ETJ, because it could be, we can go with the cities, we can go with the counties, we can go with a new set of standards. So talking with both of the cities, we know we have some ILAs that are older that need to go ahead and be updated to match really how the process is working right now and what type of standards do we want to go ahead and look at.
What were the dates on those ILAs?
The ILAs, Connor, David?
93, I think.
2002.
Oh, 2002.
So 22 years.
I knew that was the case for College Station, but I wasn't sure about Bryan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when the new subdivision regulations were voted on and went into effect, it was suggested that the ILAs be updated then, but nothing ever took place.
The ILAs are a little bit more difficult to update because when we have our county subdivision regulations, we can approve those as a Commissioners Court body and say we agree that these should be done. Now when we get to the interlocal agreements, that's going to have to be the Commissioners Court has to agree and approve on the interlocal agreement, but then the city council of each of those cities also have to approve on the individual agreement. So sometimes we generally start with the two staffs trying to work out what they think the best set of regulations are. Generally, the cities have more resources to be able to review and process, so it does make sense for them to handle the application process. But then, you do have questions about like, well, as far as the road standards, what road standards should be out there, because for cities and counties, the legislature is, taking some steps to make things a little bit more difficult as far as annexation goes. So most cities can only going to be voluntarily annexing. We have the ETJ discussion as well, and so that leads to some questions about like, how do the cities view these ETJ areas in the future, and do they want to be the approval authority? They do, from the conversations we had with their staffs, but back to why the ILAs are a little bit more difficult is because once we reach a staff level agreement, we also have to reach an elected leader agreement on who should be approving those plats in the ETJ. So that's why it's a little bit more difficult to update those interlocals, just because it's a lot of moving parts, and all the planets have to align to get everyone to sign on the dotted line. Oh, but good question. But we do see those as needing to be updated, just to be sure that we're going ahead and having the correct standards applied in those areas, and just making sure that we have the process of, if it stays with the cities as reviewing those plats and the ETJs, which probably it would, the review process for the county to also be a part of that as well. So number 3, we move on to the county thoroughfare plan, or addendum to the MPO thoroughfare concept. What the MPO has is a thoroughfare plan for the county, lays out where the roads are going to be. Why this is important is because, of course, future roads, we want to get right of way and things like that. So looking at that map. So there's a couple of things on there. On that map, it focuses more on larger streets, so arterial streets. But when we get down to collectors, because we do have those on other county thoroughfare plan maps, knowing where those are and trying to see how those will connect to our arterials, there could be some options that we need to go ahead and take a look, because those currently aren't there. So what we can work on, and we laid out a few options here, is develop a county thoroughfare plan with the MPO to include those collector roadways, and to make sure those align with the MPO's plan and those ideas. Option 2 is to continue to work on an update on that to make sure it aligns with our county standards. So if we want to use the county road standards and things like that, incorporating that into the MPO, that's an option. Also, we had some other options just to continue to work with the MPO to get new standards to get those collector levels on the map. And then lastly, working to revise the Brazos County design engineering guidelines, or the Bryan College Station engineering guidelines, because we have two documents that talk about our engineering standards. We have the county's standards and the Bryan College Station standards, and to make sure that aligns as well with what we're trying to do in the future, because we're just really trying to seek a lot of alignment, because we have a lot of players in the room, and we just want to make sure that we're all singing off the same sheet of music when we're working with our development community. Number 4, clearly define the applicability of separate but related standards and documents. This sort of gets into just what I was talking about with the Bryan College Station standards, and then our Brazos County engineering standards, our design guidelines. The Bryan College Station guidelines are a complete set of guidelines. There's a few things in our Brazos County that we're silent on, that I think we would say is missing, that we just sort of need to either, if we want to continue with those would need to be updated, or if we want to lean more into the Bryan College Station standards, that's an option that we can do. But when you get into the updating of the regulations, I think that's when, working with the county staff, and then also working with our different city partner staffs, we'd take a look at, those engineering standards. Number 5, revise the engineering standards as a companion document to the subdivision regulations. Another question, that presents itself is, a lot of our developments happen in the ETJs of our 2 cities, and those Bryan College Station standards are applying mostly in those areas. But what do we do in our areas that aren't covered by our partner cities? So what we need to do is, conduct an update of those regulations alongside when you're updating those subdivision regulations, so we have a good set of drainage standards and road standards, unless we're using whatever we think Bryan College Station and those should be. But sometimes, when we're looking at more urban development that we're going to see in the ETJs of those cities, that may not be appropriate when we get further out into our more rural areas that aren't going to see a lot of density for many, many years. Number 6, express and clarify county policies regarding utilities in the county right-of-way. Consider allowing administrative exceptions to the utilities in the right-of-way to reduce the relocation cost and conflicts with developers. allow flexibility for extending roadways in cases where natural boundaries and other factors make such extensions infeasible to the minimum, to minimize unnecessary expenses and disruptions. So when we were talking to the development community, they had a lot of comments about, utilities in the right-of-way, and currently we're having those on the outside of the right-of-way. And could there be some type of exceptions to take a look at that? So some ideas to sort of respond to that comment is, if you're developing land, could you dedicate additional right-of-way? So maybe all this stuff really does stay within the right-of-way and shift over the road. There could be some opportunities to look to say, like, okay, maybe these utilities can stay as long as we're having enough additional right-of-way to accommodate these type of things. A lot of these situations where the utilities are currently already there, so it'd be very expensive to move the utilities out of the right-of-way and have another easement on the side. So there's some opportunities to take a look at how that could be done.
So the key to this is to integrate this with the thoroughfare plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because ideally on your thoroughfare plan, we're going to, once again, see, we know where those arterial roads are because we have those marked out in the county. Yes, we're sort of missing out on those collectors, so how are we going to connect those? When we get to relocation of utilities and where these things should be, it will help people know where these lines should go. And then, of course, when we start with collectors, there's probably going to be a lot of use of existing right-of-way down there. So if we know here we have an existing smaller county road, but we're going to show that as a collector or something that's going to be a little bit bigger, at least everyone knows that there's going to be X amount of right-of-way here. In the future, hopefully they're putting things off to the side, but sometimes what we've heard is, when they're doing those developments, they need a little bit of flexibility in there. But of course, we want to make sure that some flexibility is good, but we want to make sure that we're being able to apply our standards, across the board. But yes, having some exceptions in there. Number 7, we have including a legal process to establish vesting and fair notice claims. There's just some stuff in the local government code regarding if you're vested in a project, which means basically you're locked into the standards when you start your project, that here's the right-of-way standards that apply, here's these things. We just need some references to that and possibly a section that's really just explains what that is, so we know how to process an application, and people know that the rules of the game aren't changing during the development process. Number 8, consolidate all the language governing processes and procedures. In the document, what we'd see is it'd be nice if we can have a new section that really has all our processes and procedures. Be a little bit easier for people to find that. Right now it's sort of scattered throughout, but having that centralized sort of approval authority list, also some visual aids so people could see that, we think that would be helpful to that document. Number 9, improve and streamline the process to construct and inspect infrastructure. We talk about revising design specifications and construction procedures to ensure roadways meet the county standards and clarify responsibilities for completing improvements, just sort of, are we doing bonds, things like that. Specify the point at which the right-of-way and road infrastructure occurs to avoid county control and maintenance of improvement before completion. So we talk about when is the county road accepted. We want that accepted, by the Commissioner's Court, not necessarily it's just dedicated on a plat. We really don't take responsibility as a county for maintenance until we either start maintaining or the Commissioner's Court passes an order saying we're going to take over. We're now going to accept these roads for maintenance. The other option that we had in there as well, or other thing we want to note, was exploring using third-party inspectors for some infrastructure improvements. If there's an issue with timing and different elements, we can explore using third-party inspectors for that type of function. Number 10, revise how the county distinguishes between rural and urban development types. Currently, that threshold's an acre. So if you're over an acre, you're a rural development. If you're under an acre, you're a suburban development. So we want to revise the criteria to differentiate urban and rural types to ensure that development standards accurately reflect the current ownership and maintenance reality. So, yes, if we're on larger acreage and, you know, our road types may be a little bit different, bar ditch. If we're having more urban development, some may be doing curb and gutter, so that's some elements that we need to consider how to address those. So it may be a little bit more a function of street type necessarily than just what our lot size would be. Include a requirement that concrete streets must be supported by either a municipal utility district, municipal management district, or a development agreement that allows the city to annex these areas for maintenance. When we get into some of our denser development, touched on this a little bit earlier when I was mentioning how state laws changed, and it's very difficult for cities to annex and grow, because if we looked how cities and counties have operated, the relationship is like, okay, cities expand, more people come in, we have more subdivisions built, and eventually those will go into the city because you need the city's additional taxes to provide for the road repair, to provide for police and fire, dog catcher, all these other things. So the idea is we do want people going into the cities. Of course, your taxes are more when you're in the city because now you're paying the city tax, but you are getting those services. But generally, I don't know anyone who likes to pay taxes. No one wants to pay taxes. We'd all like to not do it, but they do provide valuable services. So as we've seen now, just because the state laws changed, saying that okay, now we're only voluntarily annexing. Great. It's a little bit difficult now in the cities because if we're extending infrastructure lines like water lines or sewer lines, you don't really have a sense of clarity of like, oh, I'm going to spend all the money to invest my water and sewer lines out here for someone who we may not be able to serve or may not come into the city. So it's a little bit difficult in that aspect. But so those things haven't changed as far as we're having more development. Yeah, our cities are sort of locked into their current boundaries, but we're still going to have subdivisions that are suburban type development that you're not going to really notice much of a difference being in a city or out of a city. But the important thing for the county to think about, since we don't necessarily provide water, but we do maintain roads. So those roads and those more suburban subdivisions, how are those going to be managed? We don't necessarily want those falling onto the county's roadway network, because the county's roadway network is get people to and from different parts of the county, not necessarily to build subdivision streets to that level. So who would maintain those? Yes, that'd be ideally they be maintained by somebody. Ideally they be maintained by the cities if they would annex in. That would be goal number one. But if they're not annexing into a city, having some type of other funding mechanism to maintain those streets, like a municipal utility district or some other option that we can have in there, that would be the preferred.
Would that include public improvement districts?
It would. Generally, the MUDs are a little bit better because they have more authority to tax and to do things. And the public improvement districts, they could work, but typically the public improvement district is to pay for additional, if there is, if you're in the city level or something like that, if there's a public improvement district, you're paying for extra police, or if you have water fountains or some type of extra lights or something like that. So generally it's paying for some of that other additional. But if we do a municipal utility district, that's typically people are everyone it's a broader area that the developer has already set up, had their election to do that, and so they can go ahead and do that tax, the MUD tax, to help pay for the infrastructure. But we could look into if there's additional options you'd like to sort of consider to say, like, these could be some options to help fund the infrastructure. I mean, I think we'd listen to a developer if they have options and one of these options were not working for them. Of course, I think we'd like to entertain it. So, because one of the elements, or one of the things we talked about when we talked to the development community is, I mean, we appreciate their efforts. We all live in a home that was built by a developer, unless you build it by yourself. They're providing a valuable resource to the community, but we also need to make sure that we're looking at a little bit larger spectrum about, these subdivisions are going to be here for a long time, the tax implications for the infrastructure that we're having here. And we need to make sure once these things are built and they're in the ground, they don't move. They're there for a very long time. So we just want to make sure that as planners, that's sort of our nature. We want to make sure that they're planned right and that they're going to be a benefit for the county and the residents for a long time. So that's sort of what we're trying to look at long term, how to maintain those. Number 11, clarify drainage requirements and expectations. Talked about implementing drainage solutions such as ditches, swales, and detention facilities, talking about that on private property. Maintaining culvert pipes and driveways as private facilities within the right-of-way, and county reserving the right to clear blockages to make repairs and potentially place liens on property owners for the recovery costs. Of course, when we talk about the culvert, we have our county right-of-way, we have a bar ditch, that's just where all the water's flowing, and then of course you're going to have your culvert, the pipe that you're going to drive over, and that's going to be the landowner, of course, building that in the county right-of-way, and those are privately owned and maintained, but live in the right-of-way space. Number 12, study and improve regulations of floodplains to address new development in the floodplain. We want to pursue funding for a comprehensive floodplain studies in rural areas and manage drainage and flooding concerns effectively. So in the future, there could be other studies to look at some of the areas that have drainage issues, because unfortunately, yes, we have FEMA maps, and those are great, but there's also additional studies that need to be, because sometimes those maps are old and things change over time. So having a floodplain study could be important for a certain area, but also taking a look at our drainage standards as well.
Is it realistic for us to include with 11 and 12 the exploration of a drainage district where we have the cities and the county all participate?
I think that's a worthwhile thing to put down, and we can investigate that.
Well, I think the more impermeable surfaces we create, I mean, we do a pretty good job within the cities of detention and controlling flows, but once it goes across the municipal boundary line, it's kind of like the water's going to go where it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought would be is for development in the future. I know a lot of communities have used drainage districts, and it's made a big improvement. I would think that might be something that we may want to put on the drawing board for, hey, how do we approach this and alleviate our problems?
And I think that would be something that, yes, we can add into 11 and 12, because when we're sitting down and talking to both cities, I mean, they're experiencing, of course, the same problems as the county with growth and development, and they're both interested in having quality development and looking for solutions to the growth that the county is going to have, because we know with jobs coming in, the just growth of both community, growth of the county as a whole, that's going to continue. So the rising tide floats all the boats. So we're all in this together. So I think that'd be a good thing for us to take a look at. Number 13, consolidate and clarify county participating in infrastructure construction and oversizing. The recommendation here is establish clear and non-contradictory language that describes the county's participation in upgrading and oversizing roads during development. There's some proportionality. If what we want to do is to require some type of road improvement, because we're going to see this as here's the ultimate condition that we need, and we're going to have a developer going out there and improving a road. We can make them pay for their proportional share of their impact on that road system. That's what the state law allows us to do. But if we're contributing any effort to help expand that above what they proportionally need, there's county participation. If the county wants to participate at the time, you don't have to. But if we're wanting them to oversize, if we're requiring them to oversize, then that participation would be needed, because once again, their fair share is roughly to what they impact on the road system that they're adjacent to. So that's one of the things that we take a look at. So having that policy in there, and then having, as we see these having substandard streets improved, there can be a benefit to the county. as well. But once again, each one of those situations, we kind of sort of look at the situation and the case-by-case basis, does it make sense for the county? Because once again, county needs to have funds, and so it's just not like we always want to oversize and do something, but in some cases that would make sense, and what's our policy if we're participating in that? So that's what that number 13 is addressing.
So if we're looking at development of higher density, does it make sense for us to do like municipalities do, to start looking at traffic impact analysis and studies for development approval?
Yes, and we get to this, I think, a little bit later on too, when we get into more of our specifics. But to circle back to, there's a big question of, like, let's say someone is developing along a sort of a substandard county road. You have to go half a mile down it, and we want 500 lots, down here. And we know that road, let's just say it's a very substandard road. 500, if it's 500 lots and it could be up to, the IT is going to say that's, 10 to 12 trips per housing unit a day. I know that sounds like a lot, but that's what the transportation engineers will come up with. So now it's 5,000 cars driving down that road. We can sort of have our first option to say, it's like, no, there's not adequate infrastructure. Do we want to say we're not going to approve this plat because there's not adequate road infrastructure? Or do we want to say, okay, yes, development's important. We want to sort of coordinate with you on that and look at some type of cost sharing to do that. But understanding their impact to the road system would be important with that traffic impact analysis to understand, okay, exactly how many cars are you bringing? Let's look at this road and see how many people it was designed for, and then ultimately hopefully it's on the county thoroughfare plan, or maybe it's on one of the city's thoroughfare plan if it's in the ETJ, so we sort of know, okay, well, here's the ultimate design, so you can start seeing, here's your impact, here's what here's what the road is planned to be outside. So there's those different steps, but understanding the traffic would be an important part that we want to incorporate.
Yeah. Well, I think we've heard quite a bit from some people who have had some concerns about a particular type of development that's a venue development as well as a subdivision development. And I don't know what legal authority we have on that, but I think that a lot of people have expressed some significant and I think valid concerns, because if you put a venue type of location there, you're going to have from time to time a whole lot of different situations as far as traffic goes. Whenever, it may be a venue where you've got entertainment and that type of stuff, and it's on a regular, ongoing, everyday basis at certain hours. But it could be something like a venue where it's an events venue, weddings, whatever.
So that's a good example of when we take a look at, the platting and in that case, do we have the platting already in place, or are they needing some of the platting to go along with that? So there's some things that we could sort of take a look at to address that. But to your point, I think understanding that traffic impact, and then also, as the county is saying, are we going to be either in favor of that development? Do we want to allow that development, or do we want to be able to turn down the development based upon lack of adequate public facilities?
I don't think of it so much as an either or, but in regard to what we're talking about on action item 13, it's, do we need to have a guideline for oversized participation? And what does that extend? Is it the extension of the thoroughfare, or is it just in the part that's where the traffic's going to take place? Like I say, I'm not saying an either or, but I'm saying, okay, in order to do this, these are the accommodations that are reasonable for us to, in this case, partner on in oversize, or whatever to make sure that whatever development takes place is not going to have an adverse impact on the people who live in the surrounding area and use that thoroughfare, or who are traveling to and from that venue, because we want them to have a good experience too.
Yeah. So yes, I agree. It doesn't have to be an either or, and we can work on that
Yeah.
oversizing participation into the document. Would be good. Number 14, distinguish between county maintained improvements and HOA maintained improvements. Clarify maintenance responsibilities that fall on the county and those that a private or public entity should maintain to prevent the county from taking over maintenance of facilities that primarily benefit private property. Because once again, when we look at some of the just the nature between the differences between county and city living. Yes, in the city you have more services, you have more taxes to support those type of elements, but when you're out in the county, more rural living, it's more focusing on residential, or more focusing on just the basic needs that you have. And the last one that we have, and and once again, these are the overarching bigger ones, and then we'll get into our individual ones here in just a second. Establish a preferred form of fiscal security for construction. So when we're talking about bonds, those type of things, requiring preliminary acceptance of construction before the final plat approval and full acceptance before recording. One recommendation, and then also state law changed a couple of years ago with HB 3167, and basically what the state did was say, you know, some landowner, developer can come with basically a final plat and a bond showing how for the infrastructure that goes along with that, and basically we have to review and either approve it if it meets our county standards, or you could still deny it if it's deficient and not meeting the county standards. But if they want to go ahead and submit that, we have our 30 days to take a look at it and review it, and if we deny it, we tell them how it doesn't meet the regulations, and they have a chance to correct that and bring it back to us. So we have that option in there. It's okay to run dual options. Yes, we have to have the requirement that state law has, but what most people are familiar with doing is coming with a preliminary plat, coming with a final plat. That's what most of the development community is going to prefer. So that's probably going to be the main way people do, but of course we want to have this option because once again state law tells us this is if someone does this, we got to allow it. So we want to make sure that that's in the subregs.
Can you give me just an idea, just overview of what House Bill 3167 did?
So what 3167 did was, before, there's different ways that you can process the preliminary and the final plat. So sometimes, and this is also the same for cities, where someone would come in and do the preliminary plat, which is your general concept and your layout, sort of the proof, like, hey, my subdivision is going to work. Court or the court, or in the city case, the P&Z or the council could take a look at it and say, like, okay, yeah, this meets our standards and everything. And then what would happen is, in option A, the developer goes and starts building those roads, later submits construction plans, starts building those roads. Then all that is inspected later on, and then once everything's really on the ground, submit the final plat, and it's more like a record drawing, and pretty much, okay, go ahead and submit this final plat, we'll go ahead and accept it. Typically there's a 2-year warranty on the infrastructure, that's a bond that's going to go with that, and that's option A. Option B, similar platting process, but what you could do is you could come with the preliminary plat, get your final concepts, get that approved, then get your construction plans and final plat approved before you do any building of roads and stuff on the ground. And then, so we have a final plat approved by the Commissioner's Court that eventually needs to be filed. And so, but what we want to avoid, of course, is having plats on the ground without the infrastructure built. So that's why we have to get that bond to say, like, okay, if this developer goes bankrupt during the middle of this process, well, we already had this approved plat on here, so now someone has to go complete these roads that aren't done, and you call in the bond to do that. That's not desirable because, I mean, yes, the county's not out on the finances as much, but you still have to be now a project manager to do these things. So anyway, so that's why it's more desirable to have infrastructure built and the final plat approved as really a record drawing as the process goes. But what the legislature heard from different developers is like, well, hey, this is not fair. I'm hearing different things. You know, people aren't really following this 30-day clock that we have to get approved, and you know, so we're having these difficulties. So what the legislature came back with was saying like, okay, just as long as you come with your final plat and a bond, basically, you can go ahead and get your final plat approved, and then build like you normally would, but of course the county has this bond that they can call in. So I think it was, so 3167 is a little bit more for just making sure we have a process that the developer can push through, because if you think about it, yeah, it does sort of sound bad of, you know, like, oh, counties are not letting people develop, and, you know, I can't develop my land, and that sounds bad. So I think when they present that to the legislature, they're like, well, okay, well, that, you know, we want people to develop their land, and, you know, we don't want government holding things up. So we get a bill like 3167, which I think, well, yeah, it sounds good on paper. Well, that's not really what most of the development community is familiar with. We're really having legislation that applies to a small amount of people rather than the vast amount of people who are normally going through the process without a problem. But so that's really what we're addressing.
You mean unintended consequences actually happen?
Yes. So so that's sort of, and we sort of deal with that mostly. Every legislature will have something new coming out that we try to accommodate, which has that unintended consequence. So okay, so looking at the individual sections of your current subdivision regulations, going through those, and we have more in here. So this is more than the 15 here. We have, I think it's 40 or 50, but we'll just be highlighting some of these. So I won't go into all the detail, but we can jump into any of the detail that you want, because like I said, workshop, and so, you know, we can. Connor and David also can come up here and we can have a conversation about some of these, because I know both of them had some good insights as we drafted the document. So overall findings, uniformly reference the applicable regulations, so just our referencing needs to be updated. Regulate the subdivision design and uses to the full extent authorized by state law. Once again, just so everyone knows, counties and cities are a little bit different. Once a city's home rule, they get to really set their own charter. They have to stay within the law, but they really get to set up a whole bunch of stuff that counties can't do. For counties, we're all just told what we could do in the local government code. So we got to have our sources to what we can do. But if the local government code says we can regulate X, Y, and Z, well, maybe it's something we should put on the books. So if that's going to be an issue as we grow, we at least have that opportunity to help manage that. Relocate the appendices and other technical requirements to a separate document. This is what a lot of counties and cities have, is a development handbook or engineering manual. So we could put some of these things like our fee structure and all that stuff doesn't have to live in the subregs. It's a little bit easier to hand somebody that. Revise the regulations hierarchy to provide clarity in sections. This is a little bit down into the drafting, just how the structure, like level 1, A, B, 2, you know, there's some clarity. We can just help a reader, we think. Utilize sort of the neutral pronouns in there. It's just sort of and what this just means, it's just like when we say the developer or his designee, we just like that to say the developer or the developer's designee, just because, you know, yes, the developer can, you know, be a her. So you know, it's just some old language in there that we just want to say developer or the developer's designee. So just little things like that. Oops, if I can scroll. So then 2.1, establish clear authority for the different county officials and bodies. So, you know, if we're looking at preliminary plats, final plats, who's approving those. There are some changes to state law where we can ask staff approval on these. I think that's once we get into the drafting, or once you get into the drafting of this, that's when you'd have a little bit more of those conversation. Okay, sorry. Distribute the interpretation statements to their respective definitions. This is more minutia, but you know how we person applies to this and all that. Clarify the source of undefined terms. There's some terms that we just need to clarify the sources if we're having FEMA terms or something like that per the FEMA regulations. References the applicable agencies and regulations when defining the terms governed by the TCEQ, something along those lines. Revise terms with modifiers to be grouped with sub-bullets. So this is just, if we're saying like plat, then we have bullets under that to say plat, comma, preliminary, just so you can see all the different plat types there. So this is just more minor stuff, and this is just in the definition sections is what we're talking about. So we're just in the very beginning of the document. There's some definitions to just some clarity on the city. Yes, we have our two main cities, but some clarity in the terms about when that's applying to which city. Cancellation plat, just removing that term. We have a process for that in state law. It's called vacating a plat. So just lining those terms up with state law is what we'd like to see. Evaluate use-based terms for legality and efficiency. If we're calling something such as like a commercial plat or an industrial plat, I mean, that's a lot about how we're using the land, not necessarily just about simply dividing the land. So there's some tuning up that we can do in that section. Remove unnecessary specificity to minimize potential conflicts. Sometimes in some of our definitions, they get really precise, which can cause a problem. Why we do want to be clear. Sometimes we can be a little bit too narrow in our definitions, and then just clarifying the term county. More on the definitions. Clarify the ownership and maintenance of public and private facilities, such as the utilities, roads, and spaces. Sometimes those, why a road may be in a public right-of-way, the road may still be a private road or something along those lines until accepted by the county. There's some other reframing the terms daughter and parent tracts. We just have remainder tracts is what the typical terminology is, so just updating that. Reference the interlocal agreements and the ETJ is going to be important. Revise the definition of minimum requirements. Some other things such as we have some definitions about peak hour and regulations being a little bit broad there. Distinguishing the defining terms between the different types of right-of-way, so we can sort of see what our roadway types are. That leads into our arterial, and we talked a little bit about reorganizing the urban and rural roadway designations along with our urban and rural subdivision standards. So a lot of definition stuff. I know that's probably not the most exciting section to talk about, but definitions are important. Then we move on to the general subdivision requirements and exceptions, just evaluating the effectiveness of enforcing the platting exception. So state law clearly defines when the platting doesn't apply, and yes, we want to follow state law, but just making sure that we're clarifying those platting exceptions. Also, we can talk about like, okay, so how does someone know that they fit under the platting exception, and do we know that they're dividing basically using this platting exception? So there's some standards that we can do to say like, yes, we want you still to come in to get a waiver to make sure that, you know, you're going to come in for a address or a 911 or something like that. So we need to know that you're splitting this off for your sibling or child or something like that, because this is going to show up later. Eventually when that person tries to sell their tract and now we see it's not been subdivided. So there can be issues there. General platting procedures, moving on to, once again, Article 4, sort of reorganizing the platting procedures in this article. We did talk about that global one about like, can we have a nice procedure section, have some references here. Consider shortening the application expiration date. Right now that can be shortened up. Establish administrative flexibility for application extensions. We can have some minor extensions, just trying to be flexible. Once again, we do, like I said, there's cases that do come up that an extension is needed. Then establishing that alternative plating procedure authorized by House Bill 3167. That's something that we'd add in the general plating procedure section, but we sort of talked about that on the general one. Moving to your plan and your plat types, no significant recommendations to Article 5 because thought that was in alignment. Same with 6. We have a smaller section there, categories and requirements. So moving on to the current Article 7, the minimum design standards, looking at evaluating the flow rate standards for fire protection. So some of those engineering standards we could take a look at. Clarifying the right-of-way dedication and acceptance process, because we're not necessarily accepting the road when that plat's filed. That's really just an offer of dedication to the county. We're not really accepting and owning that road until we either start maintaining it or the court has an action to accept those roads. Clarify requirements for the street alignment continuation. This is, yes, we're having new subdivisions built and we want to make sure, let's say we have a county road here going down the middle and where these two subdivisions are going to meet. We'd like those intersections to line up so we're not having, an intersection here and then 100 feet later this is where we want those to match so we have a nice angle. A stoplight could be put there, stop sign could be put there. It just makes more sense for these. And if we don't have it in there, the developer may put it in the right place, but it also may, because they're trying to make their focus is on their development, rightfully so. But we do know when we think larger scale, safety and how people are moving around, these things are important. So that's why having that in there, we want to make sure that does happen. Clarify requirements or evaluate the adequate street access provision when we're looking about the number of access points. We talked about, I think, the current 2 points of access. When we have a larger subdivision, having 2 points of access into that subdivision is about at 150 lots right now is what we're looking at. Thinking about, it'd be nice to reduce that because even if you have a 20 lot or a 30 or a 50 lot subdivision, you probably need 2 ways in and out. Yes, you could have a cul-de-sac development that has all those type of homes on it, but once again, only having one way out of a subdivision can create some issues. If there's a fire, if there's an accident, what way can someone get out of a subdivision?
Or train.
Or train, yeah. Clarify boundary road improvement requirements. When someone's required to improve, like if they're adjacent to a road, what type of improvements are required. Once again, proportionality comes into effect here. So if they're helping to improve that road, that's sort of when that question comes back up, like, well, okay, here's an opportunity to improve the road right now. Does the county want to participate in any of that oversizing what they're not responsible for because it's beyond their proportional share, their impact to the roadway system? So once again, I use that example of 5,000. They're adding 5,000 cars a day maybe to the road, but that road's really designed to handle 50,000 cars or something like that. So 10% of that road is really being attributed to that. Address driveway timing and installation issues. This is something that we heard from the developers, as well as when the driveways are getting installed, also the culverts as well. Clarifying applicable drainage flood control requirements. So having the drainage standards sort of segues into what we were talking a little bit earlier about with the drainage district as well. Article 8 talks about private subdivisions, so really clarifying the applicable design, inspection, and acceptance requirements for private infrastructure and maintenance, because once again, development in the county is a little bit, sometimes if we're at the city level, it's sort of easier because you're thinking you only have one set of standards really that a city's applying to, but then when we think about our role as a county, yeah, we have our ETJs with our different cities, and yes, we have the shared Bryan College Station, engineering standards, but we also have areas outside of that where we need to, as a county, decide what the regulations need to be. So looking at inspection and infrastructure, those type of things are important to see, like how those are being inspected and eventually put on the ground and the plat being approved. Traffic impacts, so we touched on this, ensure the county is not overextending resources regarding subdivision maintenance and design. So yes, we want to take a look at the traffic impacts of these new subdivisions, are turn lanes needed, things like that. Yes, we want to continue the flow of traffic. Generally is the idea, and having a safe place for someone to slow down and take a turn into their subdivision. Oops, sorry. Financial responsibilities and guarantees, review those fiscal surety methods, so basically bonds. Theirs can be letter of credits, but when we say surety, we're mostly talking about bonds. There's some other options in there, but bonds is the main way to go. To assure how those are, hopefully you haven't had to call on any of the bonds, but we want to make sure that those are there as a sort of like insurance. We don't necessarily want to use it, but we know it's there for our peace of mind that something will be addressed financially and the county won't be on the hook. Construction and maintenance, clarify utilities and the improvement permitted within the county right-of-way. Just had more discussion about what's going on in the county right-of-way and who's, we do have to let some utilities, of course, use that, but, you know, having permits to know what's going on when, you know, the county has a right to know what's going on in the county right-of-way and who's working in there to make sure if something happens, we know who to go back and to ask to fix whatever issue may have been created. And then number 12, financial, our final construction approval and maintenance acceptance of infrastructure. Clarify and identify the penalty for missing advance notice, deadlines, and surety periods. Once again, there can be situations years down the road where someone, landowner or someone in a subdivision is going to come to one of the commissioners and say, hey, can you fix my road, or there's an issue here, and then, you know, you're going to look and you're going to say like, well, this is actually not this is not our road, but, you know, it's a very difficult conversation to have, to say like, what, I'm in the county, but it's not you who are fixing it. And so, yeah, and unfortunately we call those orphaned roads. So we have orphaned roads until the county accepts those. So what we want to do is just, once again, clarify, identify how those are being processed, and so people are aware. There's different elements that, of course, we can also do with whether it's sign toppers or something like that, so someone's not as sort of blindsided by the fact that, no, these are not county-maintained roads. So, so that's really going through the